Good morning. We've come far and we're nearing the end of our shepherd and our sheep stories. And if you haven't realized yet, the reason for the stories about the sheep and the shepherd is for you to be able to step back. Sometimes that's what has to happen. For you to step back, take a look at your own life, do a little bit of self-reflecting, and look upon a story that isn't based in reality. Because sometimes when we look at a story that isn't not based in reality, but when we look at a story that's more of a hypothetical or a story that's kind of symbolic of things that we're experiencing, sometimes what we find is that the things that we say we'd be willing to do, the things that we say we'd be willing to tolerate, really aren't true. It's only true that you say those things because of your current circumstances. There could be multitude of reasons for the reasons that you think that you should think the way you do, that you've been influenced the way you are. And sometimes what happens is, if you're a sheep, and it's likely that you are, is that you get kind of locked in. You get stuck in this bubble. You're not really able to think outside of it, right? You get stuck in this herd mindset and you find yourself kind of thinking like everyone else next to you. So every time something huge goes on, this kind of huge movement, and you see all these people, sometimes physically, but a lot of times intellectually moving towards the same thoughts or the same ideas or the same conspiracy theories, what you see is these huge movements. Now, when I say herd mentality, it doesn't mean that 100% of the herd is moving towards one idea. That's typically not what we see in reality with human beings. Rather, what we see is something like 10% all moving towards one thing, then 25% all moving towards another, maybe 50% moving towards something else. We almost never see 75% or 100% all agreeing to move towards some kind of idea. Where we do see it in more rare circumstances, especially in American society, where we see a society with 75% or 100% moving towards a certain idea, would be such thing typically like murder. Should someone who kills someone be in jail? 75% to 100% of people usually say yes. Should someone who raped someone with shadow beyond a reasonable doubt, if we have all that evidence showing, we have an eyewitness, we have DNA, should that person go to jail? 75%, 100% of Americans are going to say yes. Right? So we do have things that we all have very similar ideas about. So then we have examples of what people actually agree upon, and the major things that bring 75% to 100% of society to move towards an idea. Now, what we find in society, however, is most things actually we do not agree on, right? Once upon a time, we could say that Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals had more in common than they did not. We could say they had more. Sure, they had a huge disagreement about slavery, and so that was dealt with, right? When you start saying this person, this thing is human, this thing is not human, you run into societal problems. Huge problems. I think there's a way to fix that. But regardless, we could say once upon a time that Republicans and Democrats had more alike than they had differences. Once upon a time, both would have never said yes to transing kids. Both would have never said yes to having a bakery that refuses to bake a cake for a gay man be canceled and have their life ruined. Both would have said that's wrong. Let's not make that happen, right? Yep. Both would have probably said, let's have some reasonable laws on abortion and ensure that we're not having abortion after viability, and that, or both would have probably agreed that after heartbeat, maybe we shouldn't be performing abortions. Maybe that's something else that they had in common. We used to have it more so in common. Hey, violent criminals that we have all this evidence stacked against for, they should be put to death. Why are we all paying for them in society? Why are we expending our resources? Right? Those are things that we used to agree about. What in the world has happened? What in the world has happened? Today, most Democrats are going to push and push and push so someone doesn't get the death penalty. Most Democrats are going to be okay with transing your kids. Most Democrats cheer if a bakery gets screwed over or loses their licensing because they didn't want to sell a gay couple a freaking cake, right? We have less that we agree on now than we used to. And that's because we don't agree on the fundamentals. So therefore, in our herd, what we see is we see splits of 10%, 20%, 30%, 50% moving towards an idea, moving towards a direction altogether. Well, what happens to the common grounds? Well, we already talked about the few common grounds that typically we can all stand on 10 toes with each other, but even those are deteriorating. Okay, we have a man in society that gets, you know, a little bit, what should we call it? Maybe a little bit harassed. Maybe the police officer went a little bit overboard. Maybe what he did was a little bit extreme. But what he did wasn't the reason for the death of the individual. But maybe if they hadn't done that and they had gotten him to certain care, he would have survived. Probably not, because the guy was resisting arrest. You know who I'm talking about, our boy Floyd. Okay? So we have that situation there. The police officer put his knee on Floyd's neck. And that's not the reason Floyd died, though. But what the officer did, a lot of people think, is a little bit too extreme. They think that the police officer wasn't trained to do that, and that was, what is the word I'm looking for? Well, let's just say it's the wrong use of force, or it's an extreme use of force, is what we're gonna call it. Jeez, man. Anyhow, yes, so this officer puts his knee on this guy's neck. We say extreme use of force. That's an overuse of your force. Why would you do that? You didn't need to do that. There were 3 of you or 4 of you, I can't remember how many there were, and it's one man, but the man doesn't die from that. The man dies from asphyxiation, which is shown in the court case that's what the guy actually died from. Yet the police officer is sent to jail. The guy actually went to jail. Mostly because we had a kangaroo court. Mostly. So as society, we used to think something like this. Someone gets arrested. They're a piece of shit to begin with, right? They haven't really done much good in their life. They've beat their pregnant wife or something. They're kind of just a criminal all around. Not really like someone great in the first place. This person resists arrest, and the officers have to get a little physical with the person that's resisting arrest. As society, we used to think that if you're resisting arrest, and all you could have in other words, man, all you would have had to do to get out of the situation was just put your arms behind your back, get out, put your chest on the car, and then they would have, walked you away, and then you could have dealt with the situation later. Most of the time, if the police officers are going to arrest you, they're not going to change their mind because you're retarded, and you think that you should just, resist arrest, right? That's usually not how that happens. Usually it doesn't work like that. Can we agree? We used to all agree that maybe police officers have to get a little bit more physical with you if you're going to resist arrest. And we also used to agree that you're kind of stupid if you're resisting arrest, because there's so many other things that you can do other than resist arrest. It's just not a good idea. That's how you get injured. That's how you get hurt. That's how you get everything riled up. So you just don't resist arrest. But really, the best thing to do is just don't freaking get arrested. You know? Right? Am I right? So if we're not on the same page as a society any longer, and we disagree on basic fundamental truths, then where does that leave us? And if I'm making the argument that Americans disagree on a fundamental level, then how come there's a whole other side just saying Republicans and Democrats are the same? How come? Did I not just point towards the fundamental disagreements between conservatives and liberals? Did I not just point to them? Now, I do want to be fair to the liberals, because the liberals still share a lot of our fundamental agreements. The progressive liberals, which have captivated and which are the majority in the Democrat Party, absolutely do not agree with the fundamentals that most Republicans and conservatives share. I don't think there's any disagreement to be had there. We can point towards those disagreements all the time. You can go on social media, Instagram, TikTok, whatever you want. Take a look. Look at what they're saying. Look at what they're arguing about. They're arguing about basic fundamental truths that we used to think was self-evident. That's what they're arguing about. We're losing the battle. But I want to go back to the sheep. So those things that we just referenced here, that's where this is leading us. It's leading us to truly take a look and see what's happening here. This is your opportunity. If you're a sheep, this is your opportunity to course correct. And you can. You absolutely can. Even in peace times, the sheep are still able to course correct without losing their children, without losing their lives, and without losing their culture. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. For example, young men in America right now who had some really sheepish freaking behavior, and they bought into this story of feminism. What you're seeing right now is the young men in my generation, they're starting to say, hold on a freaking minute. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Why is it that most of these women are able to take children from us? Why is it that these women are able to kill our unborn children and we have no say? Why is it that society looks at fathers as lesser parents than the mother? Why does society think that the woman owns the child and she has a right to the child that the father doesn't? Men are starting to wake up to this. They're starting to have a problem with it. My generation is probably going to be able to create some major shifts. Why is it that a woman who's married to a man cheats on the man and still takes half of his earnings and half of his funds? Why is there no consequences for breaking up families? Why is there no consequences for choosing your happiness instead of your family? Men are starting to wake up to that. You see, men are course correcting. They're course correcting. And to be fair now, men course corrected back in the day also when the feminist movement happened. something had to change. The way women were being treated probably wasn't the best. I think we can agree on that. And maybe it wasn't the best, and there were some things we had to change. But instead of changing minute little details, we decided to change the entire system. We over course corrected, and now what we're doing is we're starting to course correct. But what we can't do this time is we can't over course correct. Over course correcting might be doing what Andrew Wilson is saying and just going straight for the appeal the fifth. Women should not vote any longer. And that might be a little bit of an over course correction. Even though I agree with Andrew Wilson, is that's somewhere that we should get. I think we should get there by a vote and not by means of force. Now, not that Andrew Wilson is saying that we need to use force to get there, but I think by all means, that's not how we should get there. We should be able to convince the women in our lives that they should be able to trust us to vote on their behalf. Now, I think one way, I might disagree with Andrew Wilson is that, well, only married women should lose their voting abilities and they should vote as a family, but single women, they should simply be able to vote, not because they exist and breathe as a woman, but any individual who owns a home, any individual who owns a business, any individual whom has a child, in my opinion, should be able to vote, because the stakes are higher for you if you've invested into your future in this country. Therefore, you should be able to vote, because the laws that come into effect, they change your life, and they're going to affect your business. They're going to affect your children. So you should have some kind of say in what happens in those things if you've invested in your future. Investors should vote. Okay. Nevertheless, you kind of see where we're going here. We're going to spend more time on all those points after we're done with our story. And today is the last tidbit of our sheep and shepherd. We're actually going to end it here today. I've told you stories upon stories, and I've built you different scenarios in which the sheep or the shepherd, they come into power, they go out of power, losses occur. I'm practically building you and showing you the cycle of our society. Do you see it yet? Do you see it? I'm asking you to course correct. If you're an isolationist, I'm begging you, course correct. It is not helpful to be an isolationist. There are better ways that we can go about fighting our wars. By all means, there are better ways we can do it, more moral ways that we can do it. But being isolationist is not great. It's not good for us, and it's not good for our allies. What our allies are doing is being selfish. They're being selfish. They're not spending what they should on their military, and they're being isolationist. They're refusing to involve themselves in other conflicts, and they think of themselves as better and more moral for not doing it. They're not. You're not more moral because you refuse to participate in foreign conflicts. No, you're not. Absolutely not. I will show you the number of deaths that have occurred in our large wars. I will remind you that with the weapons we have today, it might just be quite a bit more. Even in the conflict between Israel and Gaza, we're thinking something like 50 or 60,000 people. I don't know where you're from, but pick your city with 50 or 75,000 people and imagine that city just disappearing. Imagine that city just disappearing. That's how many people have died. conflicts suck. Conflicts absolutely suck. Turning a blind eye to your adversaries, turning a blind eye to your known enemies, and just allowing them to amass power as if they're not going to use that power to screw you is just not the case. So in our story with the shepherd and the sheep, that's what we're referencing. That's what we're talking about. Now, I just remembered, I did tell you last time that we had a part 2 from our last video, but I think we hit on some good points to really bring you back, to really give you an idea. If you were missing it so far as to why we're talking about sheep and shepherds, those are some of the reasons why. The reason is I want you to course correct. The reason is I want to bring you back to reality. The reason is I want to challenge you with a hypothetical. And if you accept my hypothetical, then I'm telling you to course correct. Stop wanting to be an isolationist. Stop it.